Hi again, it's me. I can guarantee absolutely none of you got that reference. We're back, almost a year after the last one. No, it didn't take me that long to listen to all these stories, I was just too tight to buy them. You already know the drill if you saw the last video, and if you didn't, then why are you here? Maybe you just like one of the stories that we're going to be talking about. I don't know. Either way, let's get right into it. The Eighth Doctor and Charlie, trapped in the Divergent Universe. Living Legend. Bet you weren't expecting this. Or you were, then fair enough. As a precursor to Zagreus, though it has really no bearing on the story whatsoever, Living Legend was released on a CD in Doctor Who magazine along with the making of Zagreus. Coming in at 20 minutes of length, it's not exactly the longest of stories, so I don't have too much to say on it. I actually ended up listening to this last just to get a taste of what stories were like before the Divergent Universe from a perspective after being in the Divergent Universe. And when you compare the styles, it really does feel like I've been on an adventure in a different universe. It really shook up the format. It's 1982 and Italy have won the World Cup 3-1. The entire country is out celebrating like it's VA Day all over again, but the Doctor and Charlie aren't here to party. They're here on business, investigating a strange energy that is light years ahead of what it should be. The cause are Vengor and Thon, played by Stephen Perring and Conrad Westmass respectively. Remember those names as they will be coming up later. This entire story is just basically 20 minutes of comedy. Charlie and the Doctor pretend to be Charlie Ostentatious and her assistant, Time Lords here to witness history in the making. By revealing future events that of course aren't exactly true, the duo managed to turn Thon against Vengor and get Vengor drunk. There's not much else I can say other than it being a fun-packed 20 minutes, and for that I'll give it a 7 out of 10. I can't in good faith put this any higher than that due to the length, but I would recommend that everyone should listen to this, especially considering that it is free. Scherzo. Rob Shearman, my beloved. Scherzo can best be described as a fever dream, and as the embrace the darkness of this arc, properly embracing, no pun intended, the audio format to its fullest extent. We left off in Zagreus, with the Doctor and Charlie being exiled to the Divergent Universe, the primary setting for this arc, with Zagreus itself still partially being inside of the Doctor. They arrive, and the TARDIS doesn't really know what to do. In this universe, time doesn't really move on a linear path. It doesn't really move at all. It's a universe of anti-time, a concept on its own that's kind of difficult to comprehend. How can they move? How can they really do anything without such a concept as time? The TARDIS is quickly written out the story by basically being unable to exist in such a universe. It's a time machine. It's meant to cross the void beyond the mind and travel through the fourth dimension, but here there is no fourth dimension, so it basically has a midlife crisis and expels the pair to the nothingness outside. But here's the catch. There is something. A blinding bright light that forces Charlie and the Doctor to hold hands and just walk forward. They don't know where they're going, they don't know what's happening, all they know is that they can walk forward. This entire story is shared between three characters, which definitely kept the budget down. Charlie, who has absolutely no idea what's going on. The Doctor, who still retains some of his Zagreus persona, so he's just constantly messing with her, and through that kind of showing her the properties of this universe. He tells her that he can smell all sorts of wondrous goodies, so of course she can smell them as well. But there's nothing really there, there's nothing to smell. Her brain can't handle the concept of there being literally nothing, so latches onto anything that it can, filling in the gaps. He makes her wonder whether the air is oxygen. It's certainly breathable, but maybe her lungs are just forcing themselves to survive, grabbing every scrap of oxygen that they can. She starts to panic, no longer able to breathe in what may or may not be oxygen, but don't worry, it is oxygen. He's just messing with her. That's the beauty of the format at play here. The characters are deprived of every sense except their hearing. A bit like us, we can never see what the characters are doing unless they describe it to us. It's all left to our imagination. And in this case, whatever's around them is left to their imagination, and they can only hear what we can hear. It's not what I'd say is atmospheric, I'd instead call it familiar. For the most part, they see what we see, which is nothing. and they hear what we hear. It's perfect. This is furthered through the third character, being the sound creature, a creature of pure sound that just copies what it hears, and all it can hear here is the Doctor and Charlie. We also get an expansion here on Charlie and the Doctor's sort of love story. She says at the end of The Grace that she loves him, which is great, but it also felt like it was absolutely out of nowhere. I'm not a huge fan of Doctor-companion relationships in the show, so here it really does nothing for me. It just feels weird. I don't know, I don't feel like the build-up was there, like it actually existed, because it didn't. Nothing in the first series and second series really suggested that these two were characters that were going to be in love, and they don't really feel in love here. It doesn't even appear for the rest of the arc. But at the same time, who wouldn't fall in love with Paul McGann after travelling with him for months? A lot of people, no, the vast majority rave about how this story is a perfect 10 out of 10 and such a great story. I saw it with Chimes of Midnight. The content there was flawless and the story was really gripping. Here though, I honestly just don't see it. I really don't know what you're getting at. I see so much about how this story is amazing, but I never actually see any reason as to why. But the actual content of the story, it's not really on the same level for me. Maybe I'm not into more abstract and conceptual stories, but I can certainly appreciate them. While this was good, it wasn't 10 out of 10 good. It wasn't Chimes of Midnight good. This is going to sound like sacrilege, but at the end of the day, it's just my opinion. 7 out of 10. The Creed of the Kromon. Continuing on from Scherzo, we get our first proper endeavour into the Divergent Universe with the Creed of the Kromon, which is actually pronounced Kromon, which doesn't sit right with me at all. Here we're introduced to our brand new Utermazon companion, Keris, which is spelt like a C, then an apostrophe, and then Riz. Personally, I prefer W Riz. Yeah, that was a bad joke. Keris is the first proper alien companion in a while, and I'm interested in seeing how they'll adapt his appearance to a contemporary Earth setting, when they inevitably escape the Divergent Universe, of course. His appearance is strangely just like it is on the cover, with an exoskeleton over his head and a chameleon-like ability to adapt to his surroundings, which I'm sure the writers will have an absolute field day with. I quite like him as a companion, but it's too early to say for sure just how good he'll be. The namesake of this story are of course the Kromon and their creed. The Kromon are termite-like insectoid creatures that operate on unquestioning logic. Not like the Cybermen where there's no emotion, but more like logic where everything in their database, everything that it says, must be true, even if someone has edited that database. I was actually quite disappointed by the Kromon because I feel like they got a lot of potential, but at the end of the day I think I set my expectations just a little bit too high. As soon as the words Space Corporation came up, I completely lost interest. I was hoping that the Divergent Universe would be full of abstract concepts and innovative ideas, but here we don't really get much of that. We have a universe without time, something that is impossible to imagine. It's an open playing field, yet we just have characters being confused by the idea. That's it. Around halfway through the story, I kind of just switched off and stopped having any idea where we were or what we were doing. The corporate shenanigans and constant talk of the Directorate became rather tiresome. The only redeeming part that I can think of this story, other than Keris, is the Orug, a creature that I imagine looking a bit like an excadrill. Orug is not his actual name though, it's the name of his species. His actual name is said to be unpronounceable to humans, and it's these little details like this that I just love the most. Just little things that make the story not more realistic, but more believable. We don't have the TARDIS to translate here, just the Doctor's limited ability, so not everything can be said by the characters. In full honesty, I don't really have much to say on this story. It happened, it's there, and it wasn't that good. The entire plot is wrapped up in the last, 10 minutes, and I honestly have no idea how we even got there. Charlie goes through one of the worst experiences you can imagine, and it's just kind of like, oh, okay, never mind, I guess. So what do we rate this one? 4 out of 10. The Natural History of Fear. Already, this one is a few points ahead of the last. We begin with the cold open where the trio use a spinning top and spout off some nonsense I can't quite remember, and then the title sequence. And I'm just reminded how much I miss hearing the David Arnold theme, even though I use it in every single video. But strangely here, the theme is interrupted, and seems to actually be broadcasted. Interestingly, this entire story is trying to come off as an oddity, and it works really well. The cast list just names the actors, and not the characters that they are playing, who, speaking of which, aren't in their regular positions. So the Doctor, Charlie and Keres are in Light City, a 1984-esque dystopian state where prepositions and questions are disallowed by law. Questions lead to answers, answers lead to knowledge, knowledge leads to dissatisfaction, and dissatisfaction to unhappiness. The Doctor is the editor, Keres is a high-ranking police officer known as Conscience, and Charlie is a nurse. But they also inhabit several other roles, rotating between the characters, all except for the Doctor as the editor, who acts as our main character. What we have here is a really deep dive into philosophy and the politics of totalitarianism, living in a dystopian state where all they want you to be is happy, revising you over and over again to reach that goal. One way to make the masses happy is to play infotainments, which they are forced to watch. They're basically just retellings of the Doctor and Charlie's adventures, including how they got to Light City with Keres. Interestingly, the theme tune for these infotainments is from the audio visuals, where Sword of Orion originates from. Basically a set of unofficial fan productions made by a large number of people that are currently working on the show and Big Finish, like Nicholas Briggs and Gary Russell. Speaking of Nick Briggs, I am surprised that he's not shown up yet, considering he got a cameo and played multiple villains in the last series. Surely this isn't foreshadowing. What this story really does well is the character work, seeing our main cast being turned into completely different, almost negative versions of themselves. The editor being cunning and sly. You never quite know if he's telling the truth or not. Are all of his actions in the service of Light City? Or is he one of the children of the revolution, fighting for a better future? The same goes for Conscience, the first Conscience. No, he's been revised. It's a woman now. She sounds familiar. Conscience does the thinking for you. There's no need to ask questions when you have Conscience. But she may be a traitor. She shows the editor a world beyond Light City, shapes off to the left and the right. Brush strokes of blue below him, a haze of blue above him. No, that's the sky, and the sea, and the sand dunes. All of it real, all of it impossible. It's all too much. I can't ask questions. Questions lead to answers. Answers lead to knowledge. Knowledge leads to dissatisfaction. Dissatisfaction to unhappiness. Light City wants me to be happy. The state loves me. I can't be unhappy. Revise me. Revise me. Today is a high productivity day. I'd better get on with the rest then. 9 out of 10. This kind of high concept stuff is really enjoyable. It's what I expected Scherzo to be, and the twist ending is really quite good at using the audio format to its full advantage. It just feels slightly too long, coming in at 2 hours and 10 minutes. I don't really know why we got 10 more minutes than usual here. Just to say as well, Sean Carlson makes a cameo here. It's probably Narvin on his day off or something. Side note, after the story ends, we get a trailer for Dalek Empire 3, which is literally just Daleks screaming about invading the Matter Spiral. That's it. I just thought that it was an interesting thing. If you think I should go over the Dalek Empire series, just in a video similar to this, then leave a comment and I'll consider it. Or I'll just be too lazy to do it and won't. Who knows? Even if nobody comments, I might just do it anyway. The Twilight Kingdom. Right off the bat, what can I tell you about the first hour and a half? Absolutely nothing. For the majority of the story, yet again, I just switched off, but somehow the last part managed to bring me back into it. The Doctor, Charlie and Keres have been walking for days, with no end in sight, until they come across a waterfall and are captured by Androcan soldiers. The soldiers, I think, are looking for rebels, but I honestly have no idea. There's a plot going on in the background where a group of Androkkans led by Major Koth are rebelling against their home planet. My confusion is whether this lot are rebels as well. Might as well take this time to finally get on to talking about all of the covers in this series. As for me, this one is the first overtly bad one. The cover artist for each of the stories in this series and the next one that we'll be covering later is Steve Johnson, and to give the guy credit, his work is absolutely amazing. Some standouts are The Natural History of Fear, Faith Stealer and Caerdroia, but can you see what unites these three covers? None of the actors are present. They're all bespoke pieces of art that look amazing. Now let's look at The Twilight Kingdom and another story that's coming up, The Last. His art is amazing, but when he tries putting actors in, I find that it never works. I'm not at all saying that this guy's work is awful, like quite the opposite. I mean, this is the guy who designed the Book of the War cover, which is probably featured in 80% of my videos at this point. But when he tries to add real-life images into the mix, it just doesn't really work. Mind you, I will say that he does fix this for the last cover that he does at the end of the series, but I'm saving that for the end. He's got an excellent style when it's his own work, but when he tries to include images or faces, it's just a bit crap. To be fair, Creed of the Kromon was alright. Probably the only good thing about that story. Side note, one thing that I forgot to mention in the first video was the vinyl cover for The Chimes of Midnight. It's just so amazing. I don't know how you can make that story better, but somehow they've managed to do it. The primary issue with this story is that it's just so mediocre. And as I said in the first video, if I can't really remember much of the plot, considering that I write these scripts straight after listening to them, was it ever any good to begin with? Though, as I said earlier, it really picks up in the last half hour. But that's the final part. I am just going to flat out spoil this one because I don't really have much else to say. The entire plot revolves around the fact that this island is weird. Everyone residing in its caves don't really want to leave for one reason or another. It's like something is intentionally trying to keep them there. Which, of course, there is, and you can figure it out pretty quickly even just by looking at the cover. One thing I will praise massively is the performance of our main villain, Major Koth, played by Michael Keating of Blake 7 fame. Koth is definitely the standout of this story, a man who's rebelling against his government because they completely atomized his family. Koth's intentions are completely noble. He's fighting injustice and has amassed a sizable following because of it. He's fighting on the right side of history. Except he's being manipulated. It's like he's in an experiment, and it's consumed him and his entire movement, almost literally. Overall, a 5 out of 10. The ending is great, but it would be a lot higher if I can remember how we actually got there. Also, Nick Briggs is in this for like 5 minutes. Told you it was foreshadowing. Faith Stealer. Welcome to the Multi-Haven, a place where all religions are welcomed and being secular is not an option. There are thousands to choose from and so much lucidity. Faith Stealer is Graham Duff's only Doctor Who writing credit, which is really surprising considering this is one of the best that's appeared so far. What he really handles well is the idea of the Multi-Haven itself, as if it's a character in its own right, a place spawned out of two people debating which one was following the correct god, and more people arriving and debating with them. The crux of the story is that Keres is experiencing nightmares. He's racked with guilt over killing his wife Lyda in the Creed of the Kromon, even though he knows that it was the right thing to do at the time. But the Multi-Haven has an answer for this. Being a religious man himself, a monk of the Church of the Foundation, perhaps this is where he can truly find himself. What Duff does particularly well is juggling our three main characters. It's like Charlie and the Doctor are following in Keres' footsteps throughout, all to solve what's truly happened to him and doing a bit of exploring themselves. Following Keres' journey is what I've been looking for, some proper character development for him. Most of the stories have neglected him so far, or not been the right moment to look at him like Natural History. For a while he's felt a little bit like Nyssa, so it's good to see here the consequences of his actions on his conscience. The Multi-Haven is said to be home to 47 different religions, but of course we don't get to see all 47. A few standouts are the primary antagonists, the Church of Lucidity, which we'll get into later, The Temple of the Ever-Open Door, which I assume just worship an open door. The Disciples of the Spoon, which discovered that it was, in fact, just a spoon. And best of all, the followers of the Shrine of Serendipity, worshipping the Great Lord Whoops, the Great Neglector, giving us some wonderfully comedic moments where the Doctor walks into a ladder and is thanked for it, and then bumps his head on the way out. The world building here from Duff is on point, and precisely what I was looking for from the Divergent Universe. It's an experiment where several religions are pitted against each other, but instead subvert expectations and just live in harmony. The only thing threatening that harmony is the Church of Lucidity, led by Lan Carter, who worship a substance called Miraculite. They believe in achieving absolute lucidity through dreaming, and when they dream it generates lucidity crystals that feed the cycle so it can repeat over and over again. But of course Carter has ulterior motives than just spreading the word of his god, because his god is actually Miraculite itself, which is sentient, and wants to feed on the energy of everyone within the universe. The only thing in its way is the Borderman, and of course the Doctor and Charlie. The Borderman acts as the mediator of the Multihaven, making sure that each religion is allowed to prosper. But in the case of lucidity, which is spreading at an alarming pace, perhaps it's best to shut that down, to ensure that there even is a Multihaven. A solid 10 out of 10 story. Overall, there's not really much that I can fault it with. Is it as deep as Chimes of Midnight? No. But it doesn't have to be. There we were focusing on the characters and their stories, but here we're focusing on the setting. Also, as I said earlier, it has a fantastic cover. My only real complaint is that it's not longer, and when that's my only real complaint, it's pretty much perfect. The Last. That cover is awful. If I'm completely honest, I went into this story expecting it to be bad just because the cover is crap. Yet what I found was that I came out pleasantly surprised. Moving through the Interzone, the sort of TARDIS team arrive on Boltrazoi, a planet now decimated from a nuclear war between two rivaling nations. The land is dry and irradiated, the buildings are either crumbling or glassed, there's no sign of life whatsoever, everything is just dead. This story really invokes the imagery of the Fallout series, and at the beginning it does feel like a tale from those games, particularly thanks to the sound design. On Boltrazoi we only meet one side of the conflict, and that is the singular group living within the government bunker. We only meet 3 members of the cabinet, and if anything that's more telling of the society that they have than just budget restrictions. There is of course the Lady Excelsior, a deranged leader who believes that her people are eagerly waiting her return, and anything pointing to the contrary is just false and treasonous. Minister Tralfiniel, the Minister for Peace, and the only person who seems to be aware of what's actually happened outside and the true death toll. And finally Minister Voss, the Minister for War, an incredibly cunning man who enjoys manipulating the facts to keep himself alive. Not only is his character comparable to Varys from Game of Thrones, but his actor sounds remarkably similar to him. Other than that, there's no one. You really feel the isolation that these characters face, even if they don't truly know it themselves. It's like they're all destined to die one way or another. Interestingly, we never actually see the opposing nation or speak to a representative from them, because there's no one left. An alternative title for this story was, Would the Last Person to Leave the Planet Please Switch Off the Light?, which I feel was a good change as, from a single sentence, it already gives away way too much of the plot. And you know what, I'll just spoil it slightly anyway. Everyone here is destined to die. Being in the Divergent Universe, this entire planet is in a constant cycle of life, death, and rebirth. There's no time because everything just loops without their knowledge. This war that they've been fighting hasn't just been going on for countless generations, it's been going on for countless cycles. So to finish the rebirth, everyone must die, even the Doctor. My only gripe with this story is that everything done outside of the bunker is brilliant, but everything inside once the TARDIS team enters is just really annoying because it's where we spend the rest of the story. We completely lose the atmosphere of the exterior and the unique sound design, instead replaced by dull metal corridors. Though I suppose it does make sense. Why would the government go outside into that irradiated pit? One thing I strangely cannot fault is the runtime, coming in at 2.5 hours. It somehow never felt like it was dragging. It was always going along at an even pace and able to create real danger for our heroes. A masterclass in writing. Overall, an excellent 8 out of 10. On to the next one. Caerdroia. Caerdroia, a Welsh word meaning the fortress of many turnings or a maze, according to the Doctor. In actuality, it's just a Welsh word for a type of hedge labyrinth. What's the difference between a maze and a labyrinth, I hear you ask? Well, I'm glad you asked. A maze has multiple dead ends, corridors that lead to nowhere and have no connections whatsoever. A labyrinth, on the other hand, is one continuous winding route. If you want to find your way back to the beginning, just turn around and start walking. With a maze, that takes a little bit longer. Why is this distinction important? Well, it isn't really. Something I've been neglecting to mention so far is the Croaker, the guardian of the Interzone, shepherding our heroes between the various stories. The Croaker can invade their minds, see their every thought at will if they put no defences up, which means of course that the Doctor wins every time. While Croaker appears to be assisting them, it's obvious that he has ulterior motives, following his superiors' orders to manipulate them. The entirety of Part 1 is a battle of wits, the Doctor versus Croaker. The upper hand is in constant flux between the two, and by the end of it, we finally make it to Caerdroia. Seemingly. This is where the Doctor is split, spoilers, into 3. Honestly, an excellent cliffhanger. Despite having 3 Doctors, we're not split up for that long. The Tigger Doctor, named as such because he is the positive side of the Doctor incarnated, goes off with Keres to investigate some strange creatures. The Eeyore Doctor, named as such because he is the negative side of the Doctor incarnated, goes off with Charlie to investigate a cuckoo clock without hands. And the third Doctor, who is just normal, has to deal with mind-numbing bureaucracy and the same Welshman over and over again. It feels very similar to Mr. Popplewick from The Ultimate Foe, if he was Welsh, and there were more of him, and he was in a better story, and he wasn't played by that guy from Heartbeat. By the end, we finally come upon the TARDIS again and get a Keres "it's bigger on the inside" moment. It's strange to think that it hasn't made an appearance physically since the Twilight Kingdom, and didn't even appear in the last at all. Of course, getting the TARDIS means that we're finally coming to the end of the Divergent Universe. Though that's not what the end of the story suggests. Of course, getting the TARDIS back means that we're finally coming to the end of the Divergent Universe. Though that's not what the end of the story suggests, with it being stated that they are now free to roam this vast uncharted landscape, even if they can't move in time. They can still move in space. So why didn't they, considering the next story is the last in this setting? Well, there's a very good reason for that. But also not really. Like with the other 2 Eighth Doctor mediums, that being the BBC Books adventures and the Eighth Doctor comics, the show returning to our screens in 2005 presented some issues. With the Wilderness years coming to a close, no longer was 8 the incumbent Doctor, with all of his stories no longer correct in their own right with nothing to say otherwise. BBC Books fixed this issue by ending the Eighth Doctor adventures outright, now focused on tapping into that new series market, and the Eighth Doctor comics just kind of ended. To not create confusion or alienate a potential new audience, Big Finish decided to cut this arc short and skip right to the end, which is understandable. The unmade 3rd and 4th series in the Divergent Universe were instead altered and just put later on in the main range. One of which we'll be covering after the next life. I've spent no time talking about the story itself, and I guess I'll just say it's a 6 out of 10. I remember what happened, but I also just don't really care. It was alright, I guess. The Next Life. And there's the cover that I've been hiding. Rassilon returns, in what is essentially Zagreus 2, the sequel that you'd rather forget. Coming in at 3 hours in length, The Next Life can in no way justify such an egregious runtime, and I honestly have no idea how it filled it. Spending what appears to have been 30 minutes travelling in the Divergent Universe, a mysterious blue planet draws the Doctor's eye so much that he crash lands onto it. While separated from the rest of his team, he meets Perfection, played by Daphne Ashbrook, a character whose writing I'm not particularly a fan of. She's here with her husband, Monsieur Dakar Keep, not the hair loss brand, and the rest of the Church of the Foundation, the birthplace of Keres. While the head of the church is Keep due to his overwhelming amount of wealth, the real head honcho is a man called Guidance. Whatever he says is the voice of the church, and the church never lies, meaning that the Doctor is now public enemy number one. Guidance is played by the wonderful Paul Darrow, making him the second Blake 7 alumni to appear in this series, but even his excellent performance cannot save this story. The thing is, a lot of stuff is set up, like a full party of church members and local tribals living in a village, but somewhere around the halfway mark, both of these groups are just kind of forgotten about. It's really weird as well, because there's meant to be this whole hunting party looking for the Doctor and perfection, yet when Charlie finally rocks up, it's just Dakar Keep on the back of an elephant looking for them. The tribals I thought would be intrinsic to this story then do just disappear. The blue planet is a complete oddity in the universe. Everywhere it goes, destruction follows. So you'd think that there'd be some local legend or ancient relic that they're protecting, but no. It's part 5 before the planet's true nature is finally revealed, and it's revealed through a door in the middle of nowhere. I'm genuinely baffled by the strange turns that this story takes. One thing I do quite like is the expansion on Keres, but it feels like it's too little too late. The issue stems from the fact that it does feel like it's had little to no build-up whatsoever. Keres was actually an assassin for the Foundation, and since their mantra is that everything must die and death then causes rebirth, being an assassin is actually a venerated, prestigious position. And he was really good at it, meaning that his head is now full of the voices of everyone that he's killed. This is kind of hinted at with Lila coming back in Faith Stealer, and him feeling guilty because he thought that he'd left that life behind. This, from what I can remember, is the only hint that we get that Keres is more than meets the eye, and it doesn't surprise me that the best story so far was the one to include such a detail. I guess him being a prince was just a complete lie too? 5 out of 10. While I have absolutely no idea how they managed to fill 3 hours, somehow by the end there are no loose plot threads, but they're not tied off particularly well. I'm sure that if the 3rd and 4th series were produced, this story wouldn't have felt like a, wait, when did this happen? Every 5 minutes? And we would have actually got to explore the Divergent Universe, instead of just going to Bortrazoi, Caerdroia, and here. I also noticed that the language here is a lot more colourful than I'm used to with Doctor Who, which was quite jarring to say the least. Wait, I've barely even mentioned Rassilon. Because he doesn't even do anything! The vast majority of the story up until part 6, which is the final part of the story by the way, so we spend 2 hours and 30 minutes watching Rassilon and Croker just watch the main cast go around this planet, doing absolutely nothing at Croker's behest. I might as well just start spoiling the ending really, as I'm gonna be spoiling it in the next story anyway. So if you don't want it spoiled for you, then just skip ahead to Terra Firma. The Church of the Foundation actually has the wrong name, one slightly lost to time, literally. It's actually called the Church of the Foundry, with this being where Rassilon's foundry has been sitting the entire time, as well as the door back to N-Space. Zagreus was completely expelled from the Doctor as soon as he entered the Divergent Universe, meaning the whole time that he's been moody has just been on purpose. But since it was expelled from the Doctor, it's just been a roaming mass of anti-time, unable to eat anything. That was until it met Dakar Keep. He's also a version of the sound creature from Scherzo, meaning he is the ultimate evolutionary peak from that experiment. I have no idea. It really does just feel like they're trying their hardest to link every single story together. But you've already done that in Caerdroia, so there's no reason to do it here. 5 out of 10 feels really generous thinking about it now, but at least it didn't feel like 3 hours. It's just average in the end. How about we listen to something good? Terra Firma. Half a year later, we finally pick up where we left off. The Doctor and Charlie have returned home and brought carers with them. The only issue is that they've ended up right in front of Davros and the Daleks. This is also one that I've heard extremely good things about, so I went into it with very high expectations. And it is good, I will say that. But it is definitely overhyped. But it's still better than Time of the Daleks. Davros is experiencing a couple of issues. Taking place as a sequel to Remembrance of the Daleks, Skaro is gone, his Imperial Daleks are gone, and Davros has spent years alone in complete isolation, blasted into the vortex by the destruction of his mothership. As his life support systems mean that he can't die, and that he also can't sleep, he's gone completely mad, or at least more mad than usual, developing a second personality of the Emperor. As the Emperor is slowly overtaking him, all Davros himself can do is cry out for help, and who's better to help than the Doctor? But thanks to the Doctor, Davros has managed to take over the entire Earth sometime in the late 21st century. How exactly this doesn't go on to affect everything that comes after it, I've got no idea. But either way, by mutating one continent at a time, he's managed to create a new race of Daleks. The only area left unaffected is Folkestone, England, one of the more boring areas to pick, but at least it's not Milton Keynes. Living there are Samson and Gemma Griffin, characters who act as a sort of companion for the companions in this story. The Doctor is stuck with Davros for the entire story, so Charlie gets separated from Keres and ends up with Samson, and Keres with Gemma. The thing is, there's more than meets the eye to the Griffin siblings, as they seem to have travelled in the TARDIS before, with this Doctor. This revelation is really quite effective because, like the Doctor, we have no idea that they even exist. His memories have been wiped. It's like their adventures together have been erased from the Big Finish catalogue. Let's talk about Davros, as the Daleks kind of take a back seat in this story to let him have the spotlight. As a story focusing on Davros and his internal struggles, I feel like a previous story in the main range, aptly named Davros, is a lot better at doing this. Characterising him here in the grand scheme of things doesn't really end up going anywhere. We know that Davros wouldn't go on to become the Emperor in the Time War, but at the same time the Time War didn't really exist yet, so it kind of just hangs in this unfortunate state of limbo. The Daleks taking a back seat does feel kind of iffy, and they never really feel like a threat after the opening scene. That element was kind of disappointing to me. It's not really a Dalek story, to be honest, it's Davros. Sure, he creates a brand new Dalek race out of human DNA, but it's not Khalid DNA. What qualifies a Dalek as a Dalek? Is it the mutation process, or is it where they come from? They are all about purity, so I will also say that the cover is incredibly good. We've moved on to Lee Binding, who has produced a banger piece of art. The Earth with a metallic shield, the colour scheme, and of course Davros in his Emperor casing, incorporating elements from Evil of the Daleks and Remembrance. Yet again, this is going to sound like sacrilege, but I will say that it is a 7 out of 10. I quite like the Griffin siblings, and Davros is always great to hear ranting and raving, but it ain't all that. Nicholas Briggs also makes a cameo as a character other than the Daleks, so that's cool, I guess. At least it isn't Time of the Daleks. Scaredy Cat. We have finally reached the end, or at least however far the bundle that I paid for has taken us. A quick note I want to make is that this story is 100 megabytes bigger than Terra Firma, despite being half an hour shorter. That fact also makes this the shortest story in the main range ever, not counting Living Legend as that's technically not part of the main range. Most of the Divergent stuff so far has come out to a nice 2 hours bar Scherzo, or around that mark. 2 hours seems to be a nice sweet spot for all these stories, but what do I know? I can sum up this story in about 7 words. It happened, but the cover is great. Keres has got his first proper choice in exploring a brand new universe, and after all the death and destruction, what he really wants to see is a newly created world, one that hasn't been touched, so is beauty in its rawest form. According to the laws of time, interacting with such a world is forbidden. The alchemy of nature on a brand new planet has not yet sorted itself out, so disrupting this could cause catastrophic consequences. But the Doctor has an idea. The planet of Caerdroia is one that over the millennia has been racked by warfare, and at the end of it they all agreed not to step foot on their sister world of Endara so as to preserve it. Obviously, this has been broken. Detecting an advanced technology on the surface below, the TARDIS team go down and discover a covert research base, one looking into changing human nature itself by removing the evil gene. Of course, as the Doctor says, this is impossible, but this doesn't mean that their research won't yield any results. This is Will Schindler's second and final contribution to the Doctor Who universe, and unfortunately in terms of quality it's about as same as his first, that being the Twilight Kingdom. I generally don't think he understands what universe he's writing for, and that may not entirely be his fault. At a point in the story, the Doctor and Keres travel 4 million years into Endara's past, when it was only about 1,000 years old, and speak to the colonists there. These colonists talk about the Earth Empire, putting this past somewhere like the year 2,500. 4 million years, though, is an incredibly long time, and by this point the technology they'd have would be absolutely incredible. It's like Russell T Davies in Series 1 putting everything in the year 5 billion. The technology would be absolutely outstanding, but because the CGI is crap, it's not. So why might this not be his fault? Well, as mentioned earlier, Scaredy Cat was meant to be in the third series of the Divergent Universe, but the show coming back disrupted this. You can kind of tell as the key plot point is experiments and them going 4 million years into the past. Considering the Divergent Universe was a completely blank canvas, this would have been completely fine, so I reckon a hasty rewrite is what caused this to get a little bit muddled. I generally don't have much to say other than that. Because it's so short, we don't have much time to fully flesh out the characters and the plot, making it seem that this is just rushed and unfinished. At least I can remember what the plot was though. 5 out of 10. Overall, the Divergent Universe arc, including Terra Firma and Scaredy Cat, comes out to an average of 6.6 out of 10 over 10 stories. And adding Living Legend to make this a nice round 11, like the first set, makes it come out to an average of 6.6363 recurring out of 10. Compared to a 6.5 out of 10 in the last set, that's a barely noticeable improvement. But would I say that I enjoyed my time in the Divergent Universe? Was it better overall than just regular stories? Not really. The concept didn't get executed to its fullest, so didn't get the development that it really badly needed, in the end feeling like a failed experiment. Ironic, really. And that's all. By my count, there's another 13 stories in the main range, bar the last one featuring the 8th Doctor, most notably having Keres' exit, and then Charlie's soon after, and the Doctor's travels with Mary Shelley. Also, strangely, 2 adventures with comic companion Izzy Sinclair and EDA companion Fitz Kreiner. Very surprising indeed. The reason for his lack of adventures after the 123rd in the main range is because Paul McGann ended up getting his own set of 8th Doctor adventures with Lucy Miller, then went on to Dark Eyes, Doom Coalition, Ravenous, Stranded, The Time War from 2017 onwards, random further adventures with Lucy and also Charlie here and there, standalone adventures that we'll probably get more of until he's dead, and milked Big Finish of all they're worth. I've been Dre, like, subscribe, I hope you've enjoyed, and I'll see you next time.